It's 11:30, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to our Heart Healthy February Lunch and Learn. I'm Carol Battle and I manage the Statewide Wellness Program through the Office of State Human Resources. We're excited to share today's program with you on meal planning basics. Although these virtual events are something that we offer to state employees, if you have a family member or others who may be interested, they are welcome to register and attend as well. They'll be sure to learn something new and at the same time will enjoy just one of the great benefits of working for the state. Today's presenter is Katie Godin. Katie's been a registered dietitian for 15 years. She works with Lifestyle Medical Center and focuses on helping individuals meet their health goals and improve their health and relationship with food. Lifestyle Medical Center is an in-network nutrition counseling service. So for those of you who are enrolled in the state health plan, virtual and in-person visits are covered at 100% for in-network providers. We have dietitians all across the state. So if you're interested in meeting with one about your personal needs, it's easy to find one near you by logging into your state health plan portal. As a reminder to everyone who registered for this event, you will receive the recipes, a copy of the presentation, and a link to today's recording of the event. You'll also receive a link to our newly created webpage within OSHR's website called Wellness Webinars. On this page, we are going to house all past presentations that can be a resource for all. For today, please use the chat box if you have questions during the presentation, and we'll be answering those with Katie during the cooking demonstration. We have saved a few minutes at the end of the event for questions and answers as well. So without further ado, let's welcome Katie and get started.
Hey everyone, I'm happy to be here today. Thank you for joining us. Today we are going to kind of talk through some meal planning basics, and in honor of February being Heart Health Month, we're going to feature a couple of really yummy heart healthy recipes after the brief presentation. So yeah, we'll just get started with the first slide. So I wanted to feature just some simple tips for you guys when we're thinking about meal planning and meal prepping. A lot of times we think that it needs to be batch cooking or doing something that's, just extremely time consuming, and it doesn't have to be that way. I recommend starting simple. So if I'm kind of talking with someone, through getting started with meal prepping and meal planning, I always like to ask them, well, where are you starting from? Are you starting from really scratch? You don't do a lot of meal prepping at all. You eat most of your meals out. Okay, well, let's start with something very simple, such as prepping your produce. I love to do this. As one of the first things I like to do when I get home after the grocery store is taking some of my fresh produce and chopping them up and putting them into containers or putting them into a bowl. For example, if you've got some berries that you've purchased from either the farmer's market or the grocery store, you take them and put them in their containers into the crisper, into the drawer, and then you forget about them because you don't see them as easily. You're not going to eat them as quickly. So what I like to do is kind of wash them off and put them in a bowl, put them in eyes view, so that I kind of get triggered every time I open the refrigerator to say, oh yes, there's my fresh berries, easy to grab, easy to add to whatever meal you're eating or snack. And then for those vegetables, it's great to have, chopped up, maybe peppers and onions. Maybe you have some fresh spinach that you've already got easily accessible, and you can add those to omelets or to tacos, to sandwiches. Use baby carrots, cut up pepper for snacks. Those are kind of some of the benefits when you think about starting simple and using that for part of your meal planning and meal prepping. It's just having them cut, having them chopped up and available. Okay. The second tip I've put on here is, just focus on one meal at a time. When you think about planning for the week and, you get overwhelmed easily. I get overwhelmed easily with meal planning, and I teach this to people, so it's very common. But what's your trickiest time of day? That's usually what I have people identify. Prioritize your planning around that. When you're starting kind of fresh here, you do not have to go from not planning any meal to all of a sudden you're planning every single meal and snack and you're never eating out again. It doesn't work like that. So I feel that these small steps will lead to bigger steps over time. So prioritize that tricky time of day. I hear from a lot of people that breakfast is probably one of the most trickiest times. So it ends up getting skipped. And I'm a firm believer, maybe I'm old school, but breakfast is the most important meal in my opinion. I know there's lots of different things out there these days where maybe you're not eating breakfast, like if you're intermittent fasting or doing something like that. But I really believe most people should be starting their day off with something balanced and healthy in the mornings. So instead of feeling overwhelmed by how am I going to put this all together in the 10 minutes that I've left for myself in that morning time frame, maybe we have something that's already been prepared. And that does take a little bit of thought and a little bit of time. But maybe if for that week you're just focused in on breakfast, it'll kind of quickly become a habit for you. So some examples, something like a simple frittata. It's probably one of my favorite things to have prepped in the refrigerator, and there's lots of different recipes out there. But basically you're just whipping together some eggs and throwing in some vegetables and a little bit of cheese, and then you're baking it in the oven. And that way you have something from pretty much the entire week to cut off a wedge, have with some fruit, and maybe a piece of toast, and you've got an easy breakfast that takes maybe 2 minutes to put together. Some other simple ideas that I put on here are some yogurt parfaits, taking something like a Greek yogurt and having some berries alongside maybe some chopped nuts, even a little bit of granola to add that crunch, sometimes some just dry unsweetened cereal, something like that could be another option too. And then the other thing I've put on here is overnight oats. So if you're not an oatmeal fan, then maybe that's not for you. But if you like oats and you've never tried overnight oats, then this is something that I definitely recommend. It's something so simple you can put together with just a little bit of oats, some type of milk of your choice, a little bit of fruit. Chia seeds are very common in overnight oats because they help to thicken it overnight. And then you wake up in the morning, kind of give it a stir, maybe add a few extra toppings like some granola nuts or fruit, and then you're done. So those are just a few off the top of my head, but yeah, I think bottom line, kind of planning for that trickiest time of day is very important. Okay. So tip number 3, start with your family's favorite meals. Speaking of maybe dinner time frame, if you're really focused in on dinner. Don't feel that all of a sudden you have to start doing all this meal prepping and then have to think of all these new recipes. And being ambitious is great, but I would not suggest more than one new recipe a week. That's what I do. If that, I have weeks where I don't try a new recipe, many weeks where I don't try a new recipe. Especially if this is really kind of you're getting off the ground with doing this. It's easier to start with meals you're familiar with. I have a lot of people that are, and maybe you're one of them if you're kind of thinking to yourself, are you someone that gets home from work and you're saying, okay, what am I eating for dinner tonight? Or are you someone that, kind of has the grocery list, you've thought about what you want to make and you go to the grocery store and then you execute it when, during the week. So again, if you're the latter, then start with simple meals. Start with, a spaghetti. If your family likes spaghetti, start with tacos, start with hamburgers, start with simple stuff, but work on making a list, planning when you're going to eat it that week, having it in the refrigerator. Those are some of the things that to start with, and also doing something like double batching. If you are into something like that with something really simple, if you have a chili recipe that you make a lot, double batch it and freeze half of it. So, okay. Another tip that I really like to use is multi-purpose when you're thinking about foods and prepping. So for example, thinking about foods that you can use in different ways. For example, if you have some shredded chicken, sometimes I like to throw a few chicken breasts in a crock pot, let it cook for a few hours, shred it up. Maybe I add a little salsa to it in the crock pot, or a little salsa verde, which is a different style of salsa, which I enjoy. Just as a very brief, quick example. And then throughout the week, I could use it for making some type of wrap, or I could put it on a salad. If it's plain shredded chicken, then you could use it to make chicken salad. So there are things that you can do to kind of repurpose these foods so that you're not literally eating the same exact thing every day and getting burned out on that food. The other thing is to focus on the main part of the meal. A lot of times, even for myself, I can get overwhelmed with understanding that I need to plan the protein and then be so creative and fun with my sides, which is fun sometimes. But sometimes, if again, you're kind of getting started with this, you're new to this. I have a very simple side I'm going to show you today with some roasted vegetables. But the sides can be simple. Steamed broccoli and quinoa, some roasted sweet potato with brown rice. Keep things simple for yourself so that and also the steamer bags where you keep things in the freezer. Those are great. Use fresh when you feel you can, but use frozen as backups for those quick nights. Okay. I threw in some basic meal prep tools. Now listen, you don't have to have anything special to meal prep. Measuring cups and spoons, maybe that's important, of course, but you don't need to have the special mason jars for the mason jar salads. You don't have to have that stuff, but sometimes people find that stuff is fun and it makes meal prepping fun. So I think kind of feel out what is going to motivate you. Are buying some new fun meal storage containers kind of enticing for you to put food in them and take them with you to work? Little dip and dressing containers are handy. I will say I like having those on hand just for hummus or, good sized portions for dressings that you're taking for salad. So a crock pot can be really helpful if you don't have a crock pot. Don't feel you have to go out and purchase things if you don't feel like you would use them. But these are just some of the top 5 things that I thought, you could benefit from. And it's hard to see down at that bottom left. It's white, but it's a notepad. Whether you have a notepad or a meal prepping app, which I'll talk about in a second, you need to have something where you can write things down. So figure out what kind of person you are. Are you pad and pencil, or do you like your phone? What do you like? Because keeping yourself organized is really important. Okay. So tip number 6, multitasking when you're able. So this is one thing that I have worked hard on over the years because I find that this is what helps me the most. I'm not someone that can be in the kitchen for 3 or 4 hours on a weekend and cook. I don't enjoy that. I like cooking, but I don't have that kind of time. A lot of us don't, especially if you have young kids and families and you're busy and all of that. So what I like to do is multitask. So if I'm in the kitchen, like for example, today, if I were making this meal at home that I'm going to make for you guys today, as it's in the oven for 15 to 20 minutes, I'd start working on something for maybe my lunch the next day, or maybe I would do something like chopping up vegetables if I feel like that's something that I need to do. Maybe I'm kind of prepping a side or something, a salad, something like that I can use for the next day. But make use of that time, even if it's 5 minutes. If you've got 5 extra minutes, get containers out and get those ready for using dinner, ready for you to use after dinner as leftovers to package up for your next day's lunch. So always kind of be creative with your time when you're able. Okay, so this is planning it out, shopping it smart. So, this is where it really starts. It starts with making that plan and having that list. And I'm not going to say it enough, but having a list is very important, and I can attest to that. You know, I can't tell you how many times, as we all have, gone into the grocery store without one. You feel overwhelmed, you just start picking up random things, and then you get home and you're like, what am I going to eat for dinner? It's very all over the place. So plan it out, make a list. I usually like to focus on a few days at a time. That's me, and that's usually what I help people kind of feel out for themselves. Are you the Costco person that likes to go and buy everything in bulk, and you go once a week and you don't want to have to go again because you can't stand setting foot in that grocery store more than once? Then that's okay too. But sometimes I feel like it's less overwhelming if you can focus on a few days at a time. Because, I mean, we do have days where we eat leftovers or we repurpose it. And then we do have an occasional meal out during the week. I don't tell people that they can't eat out at all. I think that that is a perfectly acceptable, if that's something that fits in to what you want to do with your family and for yourself, there's plenty of room to plan in those days. But I also like to plan for it as best as you can. If you know you eat out a lot on the weekends, then maybe we focus in on the weekday to kind of prioritize eating at home. If you know Wednesday nights are super busy for the kids and you know eating out is just easier, then plan for that Wednesday night. Where are you going to go? What are you going to get? Those are some ways that we can kind of plan and meal, prep for that eating out piece too. So, make that list, start fresh. This is something I usually like to do, start with my fresh and with my frozen, just because the fresh we need to work through a little bit quicker. And then try some meal planning apps. There's one that I just kind of got a hold of and I really liked it, called Meal Lime, and I featured it on another slide. I think it's at the end. But there might be some meal prepping apps that you enjoy. It's not necessary, especially if you're not a phone app person, but they can be really helpful. So, okay. So this is a good tip for if you're planning and you're trying to think of, well, I want to eat those fresh fruits and vegetables, but I really want it to be, it's very expensive, and I understand that too. So the local farmers market is great. Going at the beginning of the day, you kind of get that best selection, but at the end of the day, you might find better deals. I also read, and I thought it was interesting, trying rainy days for best selection and best deals. I don't know if anyone's ever tried that out and ran into that, but and then having a list of what's in season. I've included a link here that you guys can access so that you can have a guide, because fresh in season produce is going to cost less and it's going to taste better. So 2 perks there. And then frozen varieties can be helpful as well, especially berries. Berries are expensive and they're really not as good when they're not in season. Some you can, but you might pay a little bit more for that. So frozen berries are great, especially if you're going to throw them in overnight oats or you're going to throw them in a smoothie. Okay. So the last tip here is adding in some variety with spices and condiments. I think that this can kind of jazz up some of your meals, which I'm going to do in one of my meals today, show you some fun flavor combinations. But sometimes just changing the flavor can be enough to make something that's a similar meal for you seem different. Tacos is a good example. Sometimes yes, we want to plan for something simple. So tacos comes to mind, but we're getting really tired of those traditional tacos. So maybe one week we can focus on more of a vegetarian twist where it's sweet potato, black bean. Maybe we add a different type of salsa, or maybe a mango concoction combination for fresh mango salsa, which is really tasty. Maybe we add in a fish like shrimp or mahi or something like that. So I've given a couple websites here to talk through some good low salt seasonings, as well as some good ideas here to just kind of jazz up some traditional options for your meal planning. Okay. So I threw in some more ideas. These are just some websites that you guys can go to. The Meal Lime is the meal app that I was telling you about. I liked it because I researched a bunch and, they give you these little snippets a lot of times and then you have to pay. This one I thought was really good as a free app, and it sends you reminders and it puts together a grocery list for you. And so I like that aspect of it. And then I've also thrown in some websites with some really good sheet pan meals, which I think are fast and simple and easy for a lot of really busy weeknights, as well as some frozen crock pot meals if you are into that. Some people might like spending more time in the kitchen so that they don't have to do it for weeks. You can really knock out quite a bit of freezer meals if you have that time on the weekend and you want to do that. Okay. So we're going to get started with our cooking demonstration. Today I'm going to make a walnut rosemary crusted salmon and a colorful sheet pan roasted vegetables, which all of these are featured on the website Eating Well. And I'm going to start today off with the roasted vegetables and then end with the walnut rosemary salmon. All right, so we can get started. Okay, guys, so I'm going to kind of angle my computer down here so you can see. So you're going to get recipes for these, like Carol mentioned. This is one of my favorite things to do for an easy, simple side, is to roast vegetables. I chose this particular recipe. It's going to feature some butternut squash, which I have about 1.5 cups of chopped up butternut squash. You can get this pre-cut, or you can cut it yourself. Cutting up a butternut squash is actually not as difficult as cutting up a spaghetti squash. It's not as tough. It's easier to cut through the skin, but you do have to peel it, so that takes a little bit of time. So what I'm going to do is I am going to get this butternut squash started in the oven, because if you are roasting something like butternut squash, which is a bit more of a firmer vegetable, you want to do it a little bit longer than some of the other vegetables that I'm cooking along with this. So I'm going to pop it in the oven at 425 for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to add the other vegetables to it. Okay. Now you do not, I'm adding a tablespoon of olive oil and I'm just going to kind of mix it up. Whoops, I lost one. So I'm just going to kind of mix it up in there, and then I'm going to add it to my pan. I always put foil on my pan. It's easier cleanup. And then I'm just going to kind of spread it out here. All right. And so I'm going to pop this in the oven, set the timer for 10 minutes. Okay. And I'm going to get started with the other vegetables that I'm going to feature in this roasted vegetable recipe. So I like to use a variety of vegetables when I'm doing roasted vegetables. You do not have to do the veggies that I'm doing today. A very simple roasted vegetable recipe is always going to be a hot oven, so somewhere around 425. That's pretty standard. And then you kind of pick what you want to put in there, which is kind of great. So I do sweet potato a ton. If you don't like butternut squash, is a little bit more bitter than sweet potato, could be a great option. Both are really, really good nutrient profile. Butternut squash is a little bit more vitamin C to it. It's also a little bit lower in carbohydrates. So if you're kind of paying attention to that, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but that's just kind of a couple things off the top. I'm going to be adding some red pepper, broccoli, which is one of my favorite things to roast. If you guys have not tried roasted broccoli, you must. It's absolutely delicious. Even just by itself, I'll roast a couple crowns of broccoli and then take it out. I might add a little bit of Parmesan cheese on top and then kind of spritz it with a little fresh lemon over it, and it's absolutely delicious. Okay, and then I'm also going to do a red onion. So I'm just going to chop up. This particular recipe calls for a lot of vegetables. It's almost like they're double batching it, which is completely fine. You can do that if you want to. I'm not doing that today. I am just And I kind of keep mine a little bit bigger. You can kind of chop them up however you would like. And everyone can see that. So I'm going to chop up a couple peppers. These are great. High vitamin C, about 200% vitamin C, and these yummy red peppers. If you don't like peppers, you could do, really anything. I mean, zucchini. I'm also doing, I think I said that, I'm doing some onion. Brussels sprouts are another one of my favorite things to roast. If you're kind of nervous about Brussels sprouts, try them roasted. They're absolutely phenomenal. And if anyone has any questions, if we want to go through some of those, I can answer some of those while I'm chopping up some vegetables.
Yep, this is Kara, and we will see, we've got a few questions on here. Does parchment paper also work instead of foil for roasting?
Yeah, you could use parchment paper. That would be fine.
And they asked if they can use frozen broccoli to roast.
The only thing I would say is, I'm wondering if you would need to kind of let that thaw before you put it in, just to kind of let the water and maybe soak some of the water out. But yes, I think you could take some frozen out, kind of let it thaw, bring in, and then just kind of pre-soak some of that water out of it, and then you could use frozen. Yeah.
And do you recommend a particular digital scale?
You know what? We actually, no, I'm sorry. I don't think we have a handout on that. I don't have a particular brand of digital scale that I would recommend. If I'm being quite honest, I don't even have a scale. So I really think if you're paying really close attention to the grams and the weight, I don't think that's going to get, I don't think you need to get anything too top of the line. I would just kind of pay attention to what's within your price range.
Okay. And do you recommend air frying vegetables?
Yes, that's another thing that I do not have, but I've been eyeing one for a long time. Yeah, you could definitely use the air fryer to do, really anything. So you could certainly use that. I like using the oil for these particular veggies. But as not an experienced air fryer, I'm not sure how different it would be, but that's what's fun about experimenting.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. And what was the meal planning app that you mentioned?
Oh, it's called Meal Lime. MEAL, and then just like lime the fruit.
And several people asked about storing vegetables and what the best way would be. And I know on here that I mentioned that there are levels of venting that some require, but is there something that you recommend for storing vegetables to keep them longer?
This is to be honest, one of my favorite things to do is not buy the books here. Like I said, kind of keeping them in the crisper drawers. I forget about them. So a lot of times pre-cutting things will make them go a little bit quicker. So not cutting them up would be good. But the thing about it is I feel that I go through them and eat them and use them quicker if I can see them. Also, don't overbuy. That's one thing that I like to encourage for people is, don't buy too many fresh. I know sometimes we can get really excited and get in the grocery store and we're like, oh, I can't wait to just eat all these fruits and vegetables. I'm going to really do good this week and just go for it. But then all of a sudden we get home and we're like, oh no. There's all different types of things that you could try to do if you see things going bad. Now, one thing that I just saw, now that I'm thinking about it, I've never done this, is if you see your strawberries starting to go bad, you can put them in some ice water and they kind of get more vibrant. Interesting. I'd never heard of that. But yes, I mean, typically you want to store your vegetables how you've purchased them in the grocery store. So if you purchase them kind of outside of the refrigerated area, you want to keep them outside of the refrigerator. So, and then vice versa, right? So that's kind of a tip. But yeah, I really do think that if we aren't overbuying and we're keeping things cut up and kind of ready to use so that we're using these vegetables, these fruits and vegetables, that's one of the best ways to make sure that they don't go bad. So. So guys, I want to show you all my pretty vegetables here. It's very much got a lot of color. I love all the colors in here. And then you're going to have the orange butternut squash to go with it, which it has about a couple more minutes. So I'm just going to dress these and then we can add the butternut squash to it. And then we're going to dump it back onto the pan and then it'll go in there for about another 20 minutes. So all I'm going to do is add a little bit more olive oil. I'm going to add about 1.5 tablespoons or so. And then I'm going to mix that up. I don't know what I did with my, hold on 1 second. Okay. So I'm just kind of mixing that up. This particular recipe, this is one thing that's fun about roasted vegetables is you can add different spices to it to jazz it up. This is very common, some Italian seasoning, just about, I think there was about 1.5 teaspoons of Italian seasoning in here. So I'm just going to kind of, drizzle that on there. And then salt and pepper is pretty classic. You can kind of decide. I don't really measure. I just kind of do a little bit. I don't do a ton of salt, but you want a little on there. Okay, and these butternut squash is coming out here in just a second, so I'm going to go ahead and take that out. All right, guys. So I'm going to add this butternut squash that's kind of been roasting, pre-roasting into, okay. I'm just going to kind of mix this up. It's really, really pretty. I love looking at all the different colors. Whoops. All right. And then I'm going to slide that back onto the pan. Can everyone see that? Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. See how pretty that is? And so guys, I'm going to pop this in the oven and then tell you one thing. All right, that's going to go in for 20 minutes. Okay. So now one thing that you could do to make this go really quick on a weeknight is chop all that up ahead of time. All right. So it didn't take me that long, right? I mean, you kind of saw what it entailed. But the thing is, when we get home from work, our brains don't think like that. We're really tired, and then we're not going to be like, oh, but it'll just take me 5 minutes. But really, you're going to have to get all the vegetables out. You're just tired. So any less steps you have to do when you get home, the better. So that is what I like to do a lot, is just little teeny steps throughout the week. So I might have already pre-chopped all of that, had it in a bowl, put it in the refrigerator so that when I get home, I take it out, dump, olive oil, whatever, dump it on a pan and pop it in the oven. And then my vegetables will, pretty much be hands off just, you know, aside from the cooking that it has to do. Okay. So what we're going to do now while that's cooking, we're going to prep the salmon. I'm just going to tidy up here for 2 seconds, and then we'll start with the salmon dish.
Katie, while you're tidying up,
Yes.
is there a difference between olive oil and extra virgin olive oil? Which one's better for you?
Yeah, I mean, the extra virgin olive oil is what you want to look for if you can. It just means it's been less processed. So that's what I typically buy, which, I mean, you can get cheaper varieties. Some are going to be a little bit more fancier than others. If you really, so olive oil is essentially known to be eaten, or excuse me, is known to be enjoyed kind of fresh and, you know, drizzled over your salad, dipped with bread, you know, all the good things, right? So some individuals really enjoy the way that different olive oils taste, and they like to pay attention to that. If you're someone that's just, you know, like pretty much like myself, who just enjoys using olive oil for cooking, I'm okay with going with kind of a not as expensive variety, just because I'm not really looking for that type of quality to it. But yeah, I just kind of always look for that extra virgin olive oil.
Okay, great. We had one attentive listener who noticed that you threw away the broccoli stalk. Wow.
Yeah.
Would you use them for something else? Could you use it for something else?
You know what you could do if you really wanted to, which I haven't, but you could. I'm just really thinking on the top of my head here. I'm wondering if you could kind of peel it, shave it off, and kind of mix it into things, maybe. Like, I don't know. I don't ever use the stalks. So there's probably very creative ways of using those things. But I don't. I just use those florets, and that's about it. That's what I like. That's where a lot of the nutrients are. So that's kind of what I focus on.
Yeah, I've never even thought about holding on to that stalk. So
I hadn't either. And you know, that's funny though, because I bet there's a use for it.
I know we should do that.
Yes, just like grinding up an avocado pit. Never in my life, figured that out a few years ago. I've never done it, but there's a lot of nutrients in that avocado pit. And so I've never thought about grinding that thing up and using it in something, a smoothie or something like that. So, so guys, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to make the dressing for the salmon. This is such a flavorful dish. You do not have to use salmon if you don't like salmon, okay? I think you could experiment with different proteins for this. You could maybe try a pork loin, or you could do a chicken breast, like a thin chicken breast, or you could do, even before we were getting on, we were chatting today, and you could maybe even do this with baking some tofu if you're vegetarian and you wanted to try it that way. But in honor of National Heart Month, or American Heart Month, I wanted to choose one of my favorite heart healthy dishes. It is just bursting with flavor and nutrients, as is the vegetables. You know, the vegetables I didn't really say, but they're loaded with so much fiber, and that's what we're really looking for when, aside from those healthy fats that you're going to find in the fish. Fiber is very essential to good heart health. It helps lower our cholesterol. It's really great for blood sugar control. There's a lot of good aspects to eating a lot of fiber. So anyway, that's, you know, one of the things I wanted to highlight from the vegetables. But for the salmon, you've got omega-3 fatty acids, which are really great for, again, for your cholesterol profile, for triglycerides, which obviously is going to be beneficial for your heart health if those are elevated. And then as far as the walnuts go, those are a nice plant-based source of omega-3s as well. So even if you don't eat fish or you don't eat meat, there's ways of getting those omega-3 fats from things like flax seeds, the walnuts. Those are just two, you know, really big ones off the top of my head. And then the flavor is bursting in this recipe. Like I said, it's got honey, some rosemary. It's got, let me switch to my recipe here, that Dijon mustard. So the first thing I do is I make a sauce that I'm going to spread over the salmon. So I've already put a little bit of honey in my dish here. So I've got about a teaspoon, or excuse me, half a teaspoon of honey. So that's going to be part of that sweetness. And then I've got about 2 teaspoons of Dijon mustard, which is excellent on fish, especially salmon. So, I mean, you guys, maybe you like that honey mustard feel to things. That's definitely what this is providing. About 2 cloves of garlic. It calls for 1, but I love garlic, so I'm going to add a little bit of extra. If you don't love garlic, then you don't have to add any. I mean, you don't have to add extra, but garlic is just one of those really potent antioxidants, which and prebiotic fibers, which is really good for your digestive health. So I really love using, in your immune system, I really love using garlic any chance I can. Okay, and then I've got about a teaspoon of lemon zest with a teaspoon of fresh squeezed lemon juice, which is about half of a small lemon. So again, if you don't love things really lemony, I would hold off on the zest because that's really going to make it kind of that potent lemon flavor. Okay, what else am I missing? The rosemary. I have some fresh rosemary here, which is about a teaspoon of chopped fresh rosemary. So I'm going to add that into, now you could use dried rosemary if you'd like to, but I love the way fresh is. I would go a little less if you're going to use dried. I would go with maybe a half of a teaspoon instead of a full teaspoon, just because it's a little bit more potent when you use the dried version. Okay, and I think that that's all that I'm going to do in here. Maybe just a little bit of salt. All right, and then I'm just going to kind of mix up this glaze. You guys can kind of see that. So it just becomes a nice little honey glaze. And then I'm going to make the topping, and then we're going to dress the fish. So the crunchy topping is going to be a few tablespoons here of panko breadcrumbs. No other breadcrumb will do. I've tried it with regular breadcrumbs, it's not the same. As you can imagine, the panko is just such a nice, crunchy aspect to it. It really just makes it for that crunch. So, so I use a few tablespoons of that. I'm going to use a few tablespoons of some walnuts. I'm going to show you guys how I do my walnuts. There's nothing fancy about this. You can, of course, already buy them chopped, or you can kind of find something to beat like a mallet. I'm using a good old-fashioned ice cream scoop here, just with a plastic bag. I'm just going to kind of beat them up because you want them to be pretty chopped. Okay. So, so you're getting them to where they're a little bit more finely chopped than they came. And then I'm going to do a few tablespoons in my panko breadcrumbs. Okay. All right. And then the last thing, which of course is one of my favorite heart healthy things in the world, is olive oil. The Mediterranean diet says that you should take in 4 tablespoons of olive oil a day, and that is a lot of olive oil. But I guess when you think about it, if you're using it to cook and bake and you use it for salad dressing, you probably could get that in. Okay, so we're gonna do, let me double check how much olive oil. I think it's a tablespoon. Okay. It's just about a teaspoon, so I'm just going to do a third of that. Okay. And then I'm going to mix that up just to kind of get that olive oil spread around in there, and you can use your fingers too. They're nice and clean. All right, guys, I'm going to dress a couple of the salmon fillets here. I'm going to bring my pan over. Okay, make sure everyone can see that. All right, so I've got a couple fillets here. Now, I'm going to grab a paper towel. As far as salmon goes, this is wild caught salmon. Wild caught is something that I prefer for the nutrient profile and for the flavor. That does not mean that all farmed is bad, but it's one of those things that if I had a preference, that's what I'd go for. There's ways of buying salmon that's to where it's not as expensive. And one of the best things that I have found is frozen at Costco if you're a Costco member. I really think that we can sometimes be a little nervous about frozen varieties, but if it's especially frozen wild caught, for example, the fish that I've bought today technically has been frozen because we're not inside the window of when salmon is in season. So salmon is typically in season May, June-ish timeframe, kind of the summer through September, maybe October a little bit as well. So that's when you want to buy it fresh. You can seek out your local fish markets and places like that to maybe get deals, maybe even the farmer's market to see what you can, buying from local vendors. But anyway, that's just kind of a little bit about the salmon and, what I'm working with today. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I am going to just put a little bit of the sauce over each salmon. And I might just use this spatula to kind of spread it on, make sure everyone can see that. So very simple, just kind of spreading that all over so you get that flavor mixed in. And then you're going to take your topping and you're just going to kind of press it on. So very, very simple. There's nothing too challenging about this recipe, in my opinion. All right, guys. And then I am going to pop that in the oven for about 10 minutes because these are pretty thin. Just from experience, it usually tells you about 10 to 12 minutes. Overcooking salmon is something that I know sometimes we might be a little bit fearful of, but I think that making sure that it's because you don't necessarily have to have salmon fully cooked. I mean, I know most people would like that, but technically it could be kind of a little bit in that medium well phase if you like your salmon that way. I like mine a little bit more on the well done side, but once it gets overdone or cooked too long, it can kind of become really dry and not taste as good. So this recipe has been pretty spot on for me. So about 10 minutes is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to pop that in the oven. I'm actually going to switch out. These vegetables are looking real good. I'm going to put the salmon on top. Okay. And then I'm going to set that for 10 minutes. Okay. So that has about 10 minutes to cook. And I think we have around 10-ish minutes left. So I was going to leave some time so that we could do a bunch of questions and kind of talk through some things if you guys wanted to chat a little bit. Are there any questions out there?
Let's see. You mentioned wild caught salmon. Is that sockeye you're using?
Sorry, Carol, repeat that one more time.
Is that sockeye salmon that you're using?
Good question. I honestly didn't even I got this from my Harris Teeter order. We were coming back from out of town yesterday, and I didn't check to see what they had. A lot of times there's not a lot of different options. But yes, sockeye, there's quite a few different varieties of wild caught salmon. So I'm not exactly sure which one this is, if I'm being honest.
Okay, but it is wild caught.
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
And what other cooking oils do you recommend other than evu?
So avocado oil is really good. I use that one a lot. Coconut oil, depending on if you like that flavor. You can get coconut oils without the coconut flavor to it, though, actually. So if you like to use that for baking, is kind of what I would use coconut oil a little bit more for. But for these particular recipes, yeah, I usually go with either avocado oil or olive oil.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are a vegan, what would be a good replacement for the salmon?
I guess that would be maybe tofu if you wanted to try that. That's a good question, which I've not done before, but I feel like kind of that crunchy topping with that dressing on top of it, maybe that could be, tofu could be an option. I'm wondering if you could, yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think, would this be good in like a portobello mushroom cap with maybe, I don't know. So that would be a little bit of an experimentation, but yeah.
Are pistachio nuts too high in fat or good for you?
No,
This person loves them.
I've done this with pistachios and it's really good. I ran out of walnuts, but my 3-year-old is obsessed with pistachios. It's just one of those things that, you know, he's also obsessed with other things like cookies, but he loves pistachios, and we had a bunch on hand, and so I used that, and it was awesome, so good. And no, pistachios are actually, per volume of nut, like a 1/4 cup of pistachios compared to a 1/4 cup of walnuts, are less fat. But we do remember that, you know, the fat from these nuts is all healthy, unsaturated fats. And even though that's what we want for good heart health, to really help those cholesterol profiles look within normal range, if they're not, nuts can be a great, fantastic part of your dietary regimen to help with that. But we do have to remember, if you are trying to, you know, control your weight and things of that nature, eating nuts all day long, we might have to watch out for, just because they do pack a lot of calories. So I think, you know, one of the things that, you know, if you decide to see a dietitian and you want to talk with them a little bit further about your particular needs, that would be something that you could help kind of navigate, is, well, how many nuts would fit well within my day, and, you know, those types of things. So, but yes, very good for you.
Yes, and it probably depends on what else you're eating. And like all good things, moderation is key.
Definitely does depend on everything else that you're eating. So yes, 100%.
And someone asked if you use sweet potatoes instead of butternut squash. Would you still need to pre-cook them?
Maybe it depends on how big your sweet potato chunks are. So if you cut your sweet potato up real finely, you know, in just small, trying to kind of give an idea of how big of a square, like a small dice, you know, square, then I wouldn't say that you would need to. The thing about it is, it depends on what other vegetables you're cooking with it. So if you're doing carrots and sweet potato, or if you're doing, what else was I doing? Peppers and onions, and sometimes those are okay. I noticed that broccoli can kind of brown quicker, and it doesn't take as long to roast. So 20 minutes is just right. But going 30+ minutes can sometimes be too much. So yeah, I would say if you're cutting your sweet potato up small, that it wouldn't make a big deal.
Okay. And we had another very similar question, that when roasting denser veggies with less dense, would you do something different, like cauliflower and broccoli? The broccoli is fast and the florets tend to burn. Do you just add those later or?
Yes, that's what I would do. And sometimes it's just playing around with it. You know, maybe you kind of do it a couple times. Speaking of, I'm going to check on my vegetables right now.
Good.
I think that they're pretty good. I'm just going to stick a fork in one. Yeah, they're very pretty. So I'm going to plate them really quickly and let you see what it would look like on your plate.
You may need to move your camera down a little bit. We can't.
Oh, yes, sorry. Okay. So let me show you guys what they look like coming out of the oven. And again, this was pretty, I took a little bit out of that section to put on my plate. And then the last thing that the recipe asked for was to drizzle a little bit of balsamic, so balsamic vinegar on top. So that's kind of a fun thing to do as well. So I was just gonna do that really quickly. So let me try to angle this down and just kind of just drizzle a little bit on there, I think, just to kind of give it that little bit of pizzazz. So there you can see we're just waiting on that fish, which should be out any minute. So part of the meal is done. Now you could also serve quinoa or brown rice with this meal if you wanted to add a starch or a grain to it. You could have also roasted in maybe a little bit of roasted red potatoes. That's one of my favorite things to roast, actually, is the little mini red potatoes. They're so fantastic, and I like the portion of them, you know, the size of them, those types of things. So,
All right. How do you store fresh ginger?
fresh ginger.
Yes.
I leave fresh ginger out, and then you really, I think you can just kind of leave it out. You know, like I said before, depending on how you purchased it, that kind of gives you a key on how you store it. As far as, you know, after I cut it, I might put it in the refrigerator, but usually I'm not keeping fresh ginger around too long. Another tip is to keep it in the freezer, and it can stay a little bit fresher in the freezer too if you're not going to use it for a while.
So this person was putting it in a plastic bag, and she was noticing mold growing on it. So it's better.
Yeah, definitely. I think just that, yeah, I could see that happening. So if you're not going to use it right away and you know it's going to be maybe even a long period of time, a week or so, even pop it in the freezer.
Okay, that's great. Can you use cooking spray when roasting vegetables?
Yes, you can. You can. If you wanted to reduce the amount of oil that you're putting on your vegetables, you can pre-spray your foil, and then you could maybe just use about half the oil serving that it's calling for, and I think that that would be fine.
Okay. And extra virgin olive oil has about 126 calories per tablespoon. When you cook that, are you depleting some of those calories, or do you have to count all those calories if you're a calorie counter?
So yeah, I think that some of that is going to be cooked off, but yeah, I mean, like on these roasted vegetables, what I love about eating well, first of all, you guys, is that it gives you if you're someone who likes to count calories, it gives you, so that's pretty much done. I'll take that out in a second. It gives you the exact calorie count for this. So a piece of this salmon that I just made is 222 calories, and a cup of these vegetables that I just made is 98. So you're looking at about 325 calories, roughly 320 calories or so for this meal. Let me pop this salmon out real quick and I'll show you the finished product.
We can't wait.
All right, guys. Okay, so we've got our salmon, about 4 ounces of salmon, and then we've got about a cup of our roasted vegetables, a little extra lemon to kind of spritz on top if you want a little extra lemon flavor, and a very, very quick weeknight meal if you've planned and done a little prepping for it, right? So I think kind of takeaways from this is sitting down with a pad and pen and knowing what you're going to have, working on that, prioritizing that tricky meal. If dinner is that for you, coming up with 2 or 3 options, 3 or 4 options, I guess, for the week. And trying to do little bits throughout the week, pre-chopping those vegetables so that when you get home, you can throw them in the bowl, toss a little olive oil, throw them in a pan, and leave them. You saw how quick it was to really do that salmon. I mean, it was so fast, and it really just took 2 minutes to cook. So it's really a quick, healthy, delicious, heart-healthy meal. So
great. Thank you, Katie. It makes a beautiful presentation on the plate as well. So great job. Thank you all for coming today. It is 12:30, so I think we answered most of the questions that we had today. The recording will be available for you. Again, you should receive an email by the end of the day tomorrow, but we also have the new wellness webinar website. So you'll get a link to that, and anytime you want to refresh your memory on one of these dishes, you can certainly go to that. Thank you again, Katie. And
thank you, everyone.
To all our state employees, have a great rest of the day. Bye.
Bye.